My name is Sara, and I am 60 years old. For most of my life, I believed I had a firm understanding of family, love, and the natural order of things. I thought I knew how relationships unfolded, how generations moved forward, and how mothers watched their children grow into adults who made their own choices. But nothing could have prepared me for the moment, my son. Alex, 33 years old, vibrant, determined, still building his place in the world, sat across from me at the kitchen table and quietly said, "Mom, I want you to meet Helen." At first, I smiled, expecting a woman his age, perhaps a colleague, maybe someone he met through friends. But when I finally met Helen, I found myself in uncharted territory. She is 66 years old, older than me by 6 years. Her presence is striking. Silver hair framing her face, eyes that carry both the weight of years and the wisdom of survival. And yet there is a softness, a warmth that seems to have drawn my son into her orbit. I remember standing there, forcing a polite smile, while inside me, a storm brewed. How could I, his mother, accept a woman older than myself as his partner? What would people say? Was this love, or was it a fleeting rebellion against the expectations of society? I didn't know this is not just a story about romance, it is a story about identity, about generational conflict, about how love can challenge the deepest assumptions we hold about age, family, and belonging. And as I tell it now, I invite you to step into my shoes, to see the world through my eyes, and to question along with me. What does it mean when love crosses the boundaries of time itself? The first time I heard Helen's name, it was carried in Alex's voice with an unusual tenderness. It was the kind of tone a mother recognizes instantly, the softened edges, the careful choice of words, the pause before speaking, as though protecting a secret too delicate to be exposed all at once. I had heard him speak of women before, but always casually, as if they were passing figures in the backdrop of his busy life. This time, however, something was different. I leaned in, curious yet cautious, sensing that the words about to follow would change the rhythm of our lives in ways I could not yet imagine. He told me her name slowly, almost reverently. "Helen," he said at once. Then again, as though repeating it made it more real, more permanent. His eyes carried a quiet gleam, and for the briefest moment, I saw my son not as the boy who once clutched my hand on his first day of school, not as the teenager who stormed off when I tried to guide him, but as a man who had found something that made his world brighter. A part of me wanted to smile, to mirror his joy, but there was something about the way he held onto her name that unsettled me. I asked who she was, expecting the usual, a colleague, someone he met through friends, a neighbor perhaps. Instead, his silence stretched, his fingers tracing circles on the wooden surface of the kitchen table, before he looked up and said, "Mom, she's older." Older. The word hung between us like a question, like a warning. I remember frowning slightly, uncertain what he meant. Older than him? That was natural. People dated older partners all the time. But then he clarified. "She's 66. My heart faltered. 66, the number echoed in my mind louder than any sentence. I felt heat rising in my chest, a wave of disbelief washing over me. In that moment, I could not hide the shock that colored my face. I am 60. My son was telling me he was in love with a woman 6 years older than me. I searched his eyes for hesitation, for some trace of uncertainty, but what I saw there was something I had not expected. Conviction. His voice didn't shake, his shoulders didn't slump. He sat upright, steady, like a man who had already fought the battle inside himself and come out resolved. "Mom, I know it's unusual, but I care about her. She makes me feel seen in a way I can't explain." His words pressed against the walls of my heart, demanding entry, but my mind resisted. I thought of birthdays, of the decades between their lives. When he was learning to walk, she was already raising her own children. When he was entering his teenage years, she was entering middle age. The timelines overlapped in ways that felt impossible to reconcile. I forced a smile, a mother's instinctive mask. I asked simple questions. "How did you meet her? What does she do? Tell me about her." And he did, with an eagerness that both warmed and unsettled me. He told me they met through a book club of all places. Alex had always loved literature. He was my child who would sit in the corner of his room, devouring novels late into the night, long after I told him to sleep. That love had carried into his adulthood, and it was there, in the quiet space between pages and discussions, that Helen entered his life. She had challenged his ideas, he said, debated with him about history, shared with him the music of decades past. They laughed together, they argued passionately, and in the midst of it all, they found each other. I nodded as he spoke, but inside me, a storm brewed. Mothers know the subtle shifts in their children's voices. I could hear it. The reverence, the joy, the quiet awe. This was not a passing crush. This was not a fleeting experiment. This was something deeper, something that had already taken root. And I didn't know how to feel. I wanted to be supportive. Hadn't I raised him to follow his heart, to stand firm in his choices? Yet here I was, struggling, feeling displaced in a way I had never imagined. It was as though the roles of age and time had twisted, leaving me on unfamiliar ground. That night, after he left, I sat in the silence of my kitchen. The ticking of the clock on the wall seemed louder than usual, each second a reminder of the years that divided me from Helen. I tried to picture her, though I hadn't met her yet. Was she frail, her hair white, her steps uncertain? Or was she vibrant, the kind of woman who refused to let age define her? I didn't know. All I knew was that she was older than me, and that fact alone gnawed at my sense of place. Society had taught me certain rules, unwritten but deeply ingrained. Mothers come before partners. Age moves in one direction, and sons bring home women who look toward the future, not women whose lives already stretched far into the past. I lay awake that night, memories flooding me. I remembered Alex as a boy, his small hand clutching mine as we crossed the street. His laughter echoing in the park when he learned to ride his first bicycle. I remembered the first time he brought home a girl from school, nervous and shy, barely able to look me in the eye. I remembered the heartbreaks, the late-night talks, the advice he sometimes resented but always seemed to need. And now, here he was, 33, a grown man, telling me he had found love with someone older than me. It was as though the natural order I had believed in my entire life had been rewritten in front of me. And I wasn't sure if I could read this new script. In the days that followed, his voice lingered in my head. I replayed the way he said her name, the softness in it. I wondered if I had ever heard him speak like that before. Had I missed it in the past, too caught up in my own worries to notice? Or was Helen truly different? The questions multiplied, circling my mind like restless birds. I told no one at first, not my friends, not my siblings, not even my closest confidant. I carried it like a secret, partly because I didn't yet know how I felt, and partly because I feared the judgment that would inevitably follow. There is something about motherhood that ties you to appearances, to the way others see your child, and by extension, you. People had always praised me for raising Alex well, responsible, intelligent, independent. What would they say now? Would they whisper behind closed doors, pity me, mock him, or worse, mock her? I thought about that often, ashamed of how much weight I gave to the opinions of others. But I couldn't deny it. Their voices haunted me before they even spoke. And yet, beneath the unease, there was another feeling I couldn't ignore: fear. Fear not just of judgment, but of loss. What if Helen replaced me in ways I hadn't considered? What if her age and experience gave her an authority I couldn't compete with? What if Alex leaned on her in ways he once leaned on me? The thought struck me deeply. I had always known that one day a woman would take center stage in his life. But I had pictured someone I could stand beside, someone whose presence didn't make me question my own. With Helen, everything felt uncertain. When I finally met her, that uncertainty would take shape in ways I had not expected. But in those first days, all I had was her name, spoken with tenderness, and the knowledge that my son was already slipping into a love story I didn't know how to read. Meeting Helen in person was like stepping into a moment that felt both ordinary and extraordinary all at once. It was a dinner, just a simple dinner in my own home, something I had done countless times before. The table was set with dishes I had carefully chosen, the same way I always did when I wanted to make a good impression. But this time, the weight of every fork, every glass, every folded napkin felt heavier. I wasn't just preparing a meal. I was preparing myself for a confrontation with something I didn't fully understand. I had agreed to meet her because I couldn't hide forever. If my son loved her, then I owed it to him to at least look her in the eye, to place a face to the name that had filled my thoughts and stolen my sleep. When the doorbell rang, my heart thudded in my chest with the same nervousness I had felt years ago before a job interview, before a wedding ceremony, before anything that held the power to alter my life. Alex's voice echoed from the hallway as he opened the door, and I heard the faint hum of a woman's laugh. It wasn't fragile. It wasn't timid. It was full-bodied, confident, the kind of laugh that came from someone who had lived long enough not to apologize for taking up space. And then she stepped inside. Helen was not what I had expected. In my mind, I had pictured her as either too youthful for her age, trying desperately to deny the years, or else as frail, leaning into the decline that time inevitably brings. But the woman who walked into my living room was neither. She was graceful without effort, dressed simply but elegantly, her silver hair gleaming in the warm glow of the light. Her eyes, deep, steady, unflinching, met mine with a kindness that was not forced, not theatrical, but genuine. For a moment, I felt as though she could see through me, as though she knew every doubt swirling in my chest. I extended my hand, and she took it firmly, not with the hesitant grip of someone unsure, but with the steadiness of someone who had long ago learned the power of presence. "Sara," she said warmly, "I've heard so much about you." Her voice was low, calm, almost melodic. I nodded, responding with the practiced politeness I had been rehearsing for days. "And I've heard a lot about you." We sat down at the table, the three of us together, in a triangle that carried decades of difference, generations of experience. At first, the conversation was light, safe. We spoke about food, about the book club where they had met, about how Alex had apparently shown up late that first evening and stumbled into a debate about literature he wasn't prepared for. Helen laughed as she recalled how he had defended an author with such passion that she couldn't help but be drawn to him, even though she disagreed with nearly everything he said as she spoke. I found myself listening more closely than I had expected. She told stories with detail, not rushing through them the way younger people often do. She painted pictures, layered her words with history. She spoke of protests in the 70s, of how she had once marched for causes that people barely remembered now. She spoke of raising her children, of the challenges she faced balancing motherhood and work in an era when women's voices were often silenced. She spoke of loss to a friend she had buried, of moments when she thought she wouldn't make it through, of learning that resilience was not a single act of strength but 1,000 tiny choices made in the quiet of everyday life. Her words drew me in against my will. I found myself nodding, asking questions, leaning forward despite the voice inside me that screamed to hold back, to stay guarded. And yet, even as I was pulled into her stories, a different awareness pulsed beneath the surface. She was older than me. Every time she referenced a year, I was too young to remember. Every time she spoke of events that happened before I was even born, I felt the gap pressing against me like a reminder that I was not just meeting a woman. I was meeting someone whose timeline stretched beyond mine. And then there was Alex. I caught the way he looked at her, the way his eyes softened in her direction, the way he leaned in slightly whenever she spoke. He wasn't just listening. He was admiring. His attention to her was unbroken, unwavering, as though in a room full of people, she would still be the only one who mattered. I watched this silently, and each glance, each smile exchanged between them sent a pang through me. It was the look of love, unmistakable, undeniable. For the first time, I felt truly displaced. It was not that I was jealous of how I was his mother, not his lover, but there was something unsettling in realizing that another woman, one older than me, had become the center of his emotional world. It was as though the line of generations had blurred, tangled into something I couldn't easily separate. My son, my child whom I had carried in my arms, was now gazing at someone who could have been my peer. Someone who had lived longer, known more, survived more. Throughout dinner, I studied her carefully, even as I tried not to. I noticed the way she placed her napkin gently on her lap, the way her posture remained upright, dignified. I noticed the lines on her face etched not with fragility, but with evidence of a life fully lived. They were not the kind of lines that begged to be erased, but the kind that told a story. Each one carved by laughter, grief, resilience. And I wondered if that was what Alex saw, not just a woman, but a story, a history, a map of survival. There were moments when I felt myself softening, moments when her humanity reached mine. When she spoke of the fear she felt as a young mother, alone and uncertain, I recognized it instantly. I too had lived that fear. When she spoke of working late into the night, trying to prove her worth in a world that dismissed her, I remembered my own struggles, my own battles to be seen. For those moments, age disappeared, and we were simply women, mothers, human beings who had endured in our own ways. But then, as quickly as those moments arrived, the reminders would return. The way Alex laughed at her jokes, deeper than I had ever seen him laugh before. The way his hand brushed hers without hesitation. The way she leaned on him with a familiarity that spoke of intimacy, of belonging. And the storm inside me raged again, after dinner. When the dishes were cleared and the evening stretched into softer conversation, Helen excused herself to the bathroom. For the first time all night, it was just Alex and me. He looked at me, searching my face as though trying to read what I truly thought. "Well," he asked softly, "what do you think?" It was a simple question, but the weight of it was immense. I could have lied, could have plastered on a smile and offered the easy approval he hoped for. But I couldn't, not then. My voice wavered as I said, she's different. He frowned slightly, waiting, but I couldn't bring myself to say more. The truth was complicated. Part of me respected her, even admired her. Another part of me resisted her entirely. Not because of who she was, but because of what her presence meant for me, for him, for us. When she returned, the conversation resumed and I tucked away my thoughts. I smiled, I nodded, I played the role of the gracious host. But inside, the questions multiplied. Could I accept this? Could I truly open my heart to this woman, older than me, and believe that her love for my son was real, that it was good? Or would I forever stand at the edge of their bond, a silent witness to a love I could not understand? That night, as I washed the dishes alone, the sound of running water filling the silence, I realized that this dinner had changed something in me. Meeting Helen had not resolved my doubts. Sid had deepened them. But it had also given me a glimpse of something undeniable. My son was happy. And in that truth, no matter how tangled my emotions, lay the beginning of a choice I knew I would one day have to make. As days turned into weeks, the memory of that dinner lingered in my mind like a shadow that followed me into every room. I replayed Helen's voice in my head, her steady laughter, the way she carried herself with dignity, the way Alex looked at her with a devotion I had never seen in him before. It was as though a part of my home, my private space, had been rearranged by her presence. Nothing was out of place physically. The chairs still stood where they always had. The curtains hung the same way, but in my heart, something had shifted, and I could not quite set it back. I told myself to be rational, to remember that Alex was an adult who had every right to choose his own path. At 33, he no longer needed my permission to love, nor my approval to decide who he wanted beside him. And yet, my heart clung to old instincts. The mother in Mitha, woman who once tied his shoelaces and bandaged his knees, wanted to protect him, to shield him from a future I feared might hold more pain than joy. Helen was sick. No matter how strong, no matter how radiant, she was closer to the twilight of her years than the dawn. I thought of time, relentless and unforgiving, pressing forward. I imagined Alex years from now, still young enough to crave adventure. While Helen would be older still, her body slower, her steps more fragile. Was I selfish to think this way? Or was it the natural concern of a mother watching her child invest his heart in something she believed could not last? Friends noticed something was on my mind. Over tea one afternoon, a close companion asked me why I seemed distracted. Why I stared at my cup as though searching for answers in the swirling steam. For a moment, I considered telling her, letting the words spill out. My son is dating a woman older than me. But I hesitated. I imagined her reaction, the raised eyebrows, the whispered gossip that would spread like fire through the small circles we moved in. So I said nothing, simply smiled and shifted the conversation elsewhere. But silence has its own weight, and each time I swallowed my truth. It pressed heavier against me when the whispers finally did begin, as I had always known they would. They came not from my lips, but from Alex's determination to live openly. He did not hide Helen. He brought her to gatherings, introduced her as his partner without hesitation. I watched the faces of our extended family, the flicker of surprise, the forced politeness, the subtle glances exchanged when they thought no one was looking. Some avoided comment altogether, their silence louder than words. Others asked questions masked in curiosity but edged with judgment. So, Helen, you must have a lot of life experience, don't you? Alex, what drew you to someone so wise? I felt my chest tighten each time, torn between defending him, defending her, and wrestling with my own discomfort. At night, alone in my room, I wrestled with the voices in my head. Part of me wanted to pull him aside, to beg him to reconsider, to warn him of the years that would catch up with them sooner than he realized. But another part of me knew that to do so would risk driving him further away. He had chosen her not in defiance, not as rebellion, but because he felt something real, something profound. His happiness was visible, it radiated from him, softening the hard edges that life had carved into him. He smiled more, laughed more. He spoke with a certainty I had not seen in years. Was I, his mother, to become the one who dimmed that light? There were moments when I softened, when I allowed myself to see beyond the numbers. One evening, I watched the two of them together, seated across the room, discussing a book. Their voices rose and fell in debate, their hands moving in expressive gestures, their laughter spilling out unrestrained. It struck me then that this was not a relationship defined by age, but by connection. They spoke as equals, sparring and teasing, listening and responding. It was not the fragile infatuation I had feared, but something sturdier, forged in the fires of understanding. And yet, even as I acknowledged this, another thought crept in. For how long? The conflict within me became a constant companion. I would wake in the morning resolved to accept them, to embrace Helen as part of my son's life. By evening, doubts would resurface, gnawing at the edges of my resolve. I began to see myself reflected in two ways: as the mother who wanted her son's happiness above all, and as the woman who could not shake the unease of being confronted by someone who blurred the boundaries of her own identity. Helen was older than me, and that fact alone made me feel out of place, as though I had been shifted from the role of guide into something more uncertain. The breaking point came one afternoon when Alex visited me alone. He sat across from me, his expression serious, his voice steady. "Mom," he said, "I need to know where you stand. I love her. I can't keep pretending this doesn't matter to me, that it doesn't matter to us. If you can't accept her, then I don't know what that means for us." His words cut deeper than he realized. The idea of losing him, of allowing this to wedge a distance between us, was unbearable. And yet, I could not bring myself to respond immediately. I sat there frozen, torn between truth and love, between my fear and his freedom. When I finally spoke, my voice was softer than I intended. "Alex, I just don't want you to get hurt." He reached across the table, his hand covering mine, his eyes meeting mine with a steadiness that reminded me of the little boy who once begged me to trust him as he rode his bicycle without training wheels. "Mom," he whispered, "I know, but this isn't about hurt. It's about love, and I need you to trust me." In that moment, something inside me shifted, not fully, not permanently, but enough to create a crack in the wall I had built around my fears. I realized that perhaps my role was not to protect him from choices I didn't understand, but to walk beside him as he made them. Love, after all, was not about control. It was about letting go, about believing that happiness can exist even in the spaces we don't recognize. The weeks that followed became an exercise in surrender. Slowly, I allowed myself to see Helen not as a rival to my place, but as a woman who had somehow touched my son's life in a way I could not. I still wrestled with unease, still questioned the years that stretched between them. But I began to understand that love is not measured in time alone. Sometimes it is measured in presence, in understanding, in the simple act of being seen. And in that, Helen had given Alex something irreplaceable. When I look back now, see my journey not as a battle I won or lost, but as a transformation I never expected. I had to confront my own insecurities, my own assumptions about age, about love, about family. I had to learn that acceptance is not a single moment of agreement, but 1,000 small choices to open the heart, even when fear lingers. And so, I stand here now not with all the answers, not with perfect acceptance, but with a willingness to learn. My son has chosen love, and in that choice, he has challenged me to grow. Helen is part of his life, and whether I fully understand it or not, she has become part of mine too. Because in the end, what matters is not the years that separate us, but the love that binds us. And sometimes the hardest thing a mother can do is step back and let her child teach her what love truly means.